Firstly, thanks very much for coming to the talk. When I first got asked to do this talk, I was pretty taken aback. So after graduating from university, I decided to turn down a competitive grad scheme offer in order to start a tech startup, which statistically had a 90% chance of failing. And those job offers that I was going to take, they weren't postponable either, so they would take it or leave it. Well, it failed, and I became part of that statistic. After being invited to do this talk, I was speaking to my brother about it, who encouragingly and completely seriously asked me, aren't TED Talks supposed to be success stories? So this is true. This talk hasn't got a happy ending to it. I have failed. I haven't come up with a new brilliant idea and then turned it into a monumental success. This was about my fourth attempt at failing to start a successful business, and it was by far and large my most ambitious yet. But you know what? It failed less than the previous three. What I want to share with you today is the lessons I've learned from trying to build a successful tech startup straight out of university with no industry expertise, but just sheer determination and an abundant curiosity to learn and fail a lot. So looking back on how I've lived the last few years of my life is a pretty simple philosophy that is at the core of it all, in that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. Deciding not to take the shot boils down to our innate fear of rejection and failure. But if the upside of shooting the shot in the back of the net significantly outweighs the toll rejection and failure has on your ego, I say shoot your shot and take your chances. So I'm just going to be talking about a few questions you might want to ask yourself, some of the pitfalls you and I want to avoid in the future and what I've learned. So firstly, if you're deciding, do you want to start a startup straight out of university, you need to be honest with yourself. Why do you really want to do it? A lot of startup founders are driven by the lucrative financial rewards, and I totally get that. I still don't know anyone that went into investment banking because they're just crazy about corporate finance. We are driven by financial rewards for a variety of reasons: power, influence, the best education and healthcare for your family or loved ones, the ability to give back to your community and the world, even putting yourself higher in the pecking order for potential mates. But if you have a creative streak, are a builder, have a risk appetite, and are completely okay with uncertainty and chaos, start a startup. Worst case scenario is it fails and was interesting. In the best case, you become very rich and have a profound impact on the world. Born and raised in England to a Colombian mother and English father, I was fortunate enough to experience two very different cultures and personalities. When my parents began their somewhat dramatic separation, age 13, I got moved around, school after school, home after home, friendship group after friendship group. And although this really sucked at the time, I realized how it gave me that comfort with settling into new environments and cultures, and this innate desire to explore the world and mesh with all walks of life. Most crucially, I developed an eye for how brilliant businesses didn't always transcend borders. And if you don't have to reinvent the wheel to be successful. For a lot of businesses, the key is in its execution. At the point of graduating university, I'd held positions, interned or shadowed people in every career choice you can think of. I always felt replaceable, dispensable, a cog in this huge machine, this big company. And as soon as the steep initial learning curve and novelty of settling into the team subsided, autopilot with no motivation to speed. And then one day, over Christmas, spent in Bogota, Colombia, the capital, I was sat in a cafe. I'd forgotten my wallet at my uncle's where I was staying, and I couldn't pay. Instead of an hour-and-a-half round trip of rush hour traffic and convincing the cafe manager I was actually coming back to pay, I instead had it delivered by motorbike in 15 minutes using an app I downloaded. I had literally just bought myself more time and at a price lower than the round trip home by being connected to someone in the right place at the right time. I went crazy ordering pharmacy items, groceries and small packages and having them delivered in under an hour on this app. This was like Amazon Prime 2.0 and I had to tell my friends. I concluded that leveraging tech to create a more connected, urbanized world was the future, and I was totally hooked and obsessed with the idea. I decided I want to replicate the core of this business model and launch it anywhere in the world where there was a big enough market with no established players. So firstly, recognize your advantages as a graduate. The fallout of failure in real terms is close to non-existent. Startups are all consuming. To do it properly, you can't just dip your toe in and out of it if you're the one driving. However, most of you have this advantage of not having kids, a husband, wife, or other serious commitment straight out of university. If you fail, you're only taking yourself down, so you can and should throw yourself completely into it. You also have the advantage of being accustomed to living poor and being tactical with your spending. You've lived in shared accommodation, done pull-ups on the door frame, taken the bus everywhere, and beans on toast is still considered a delicacy. So there is no downgrading quality of living, so the transition to the scrappy nature of a startup is relatively painless. So after weighing up my options and identifying South Africa as the perfect market to replicate this business model, I started putting together a business case. Cape Town was emerging as the tech hub for Africa. The unemployment levels were extremely high, which meant the gig economy was booming. Smartphone penetration was the highest in the continent, and e-commerce on the continent was projected to grow from $17 billion in 2017 to more than $75 billion by 2025. And I really wanted a piece of that swelling pie. So I entered pitch competitions, bounced strategies off anyone that gave me their time, and planned my next steps. And I pretty much had no idea what I was doing, but I had a good vision. So next things, there's a balance between overconfidence and ignorance. This is pretty crazy. So I, a final year politics and international relations student, believed I could build a successful last mile delivery tech startup in Africa, starting in South Africa and scaling across other major markets of Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt. But it felt achievable, and that's the beauty of being inexperienced. You think the world is your oyster to take, and you end up hatcheting plans that fall somewhere between overconfidence and ignorance. But there is a beauty to ignorance, and that we are capable of lots more than we give ourselves credit for. So when we shoot our shot, it hits a lot closer than we think. And I can't re-emphasize how much of an advantage this is, this youthful naivety or even ignorance that you have at your disposal. Another thing I'd recommend, hunt for formidable co-founders whilst at university. I saved everything I could in my final year of university so I could spend the foreseeable future working without pay. And the highs are euphorically high and the lows are depressingly low. And the best way of keeping up momentum is by spreading the workload between two or more of you. At the time, I thought industry expertise was what I needed in my co-founders, as that is exactly what I lacked, not another recent graduate. So in hindsight, this is probably exactly what I needed. My experienced co-founders had more to lose and thus didn't have the ability to just take a plane to South Africa with me. There were far more conditions attached to quitting their lucrative jobs, as they had far more to lose than me. They were in their 30s, even 40s with kids. Having a fierce and committed friend from university with equal skin in the game and complementing skills would have had a significant impact on the direction of the company and how far it moved. Another thing you need to be wary of, and is based out of this inexperience, is building credibility. So having skin in the game. I couldn't ask investors for $500,000 to launch a business in a country I'd never been to. So I got on a plane to South Africa 3 days after graduating to launch a MVP, or minimally viable product, and scope out the market. I pedaled around Cape Town on a bicycle doing deliveries to friends I'd somewhat forced to order through the landing page I'd built in a couple of weeks. I interviewed delivery riders to understand their pain points, pleasure points, rubbed shoulders in the investor community, and snuck into some private university events for entrepreneurs. Kind of like this one. And all of this helped me feel confident going into investor pitches. It bolstered this confidence and made me feel I wasn't just blowing hot air at people, and that I really was going to do this and they could put their faith in me. Another thing to be wary of, just be prepared to feel incompetent. In a startup, there's no hiding your mistakes like you can in a big company. If you're a small team trying to do everything, it becomes blatantly clear who is good at something and who sucks at something else. You know, what on earth are unit economics? Learn them. No idea how to do financial modeling? Tough luck, watch YouTube videos until your eyes are red. Fill your weaknesses with people better than you and sell them on the dream. Give them equal equity, don't treat it like your baby. Don't focus on equity dilution at this stage like I did. 1% of something big is better than 100% of nothing. At this point, I had a business case, boots on the ground, and several conditional co-founders from competitors. These were seriously experienced people I felt incompetent around, but their knowledge started rubbing off on me. I got pitching in London, got several verbal offers for half the money, and sensed the urgency. The window of opportunity was closing. So I didn't have time to build the tech from scratch. That would take years. I knew I needed an existing player to back my team by white labeling their tech or getting them to invest and therefore become advisors. Next point is just do not underestimate the power of networking and a huge dose of luck. After a year making my way through the pipeline, I had networked my way close to the decision makers at the company that inspired everything. I got on a flight to Colombia and got office space opposite this company's global headquarters, guessed the CEO's email and told him about this crazy plan I had hatched up, and I wanted a meeting. He didn't respond, so plan B. My housemate from university's ex-boss's friend from university's friend from university went to school with one of the founders, and as a fellow entrepreneur and a successful one, he had taken a liking to my ambitions and stuck his neck out for me. At the CEO's WhatsApp and sent him a message asking if he'd hear me out. So after all of this, I ended up pitching to the co-founder of one of Latin America's only unicorns. So a privately owned company with a valuation of over $1 billion. My hands were sweating. I realized I had next to no idea what I was doing in comparison to this guy, and it was the best chance I'd ever have. In the executive summary of my startup, I summarized what I'd done, who I'd convinced to come aboard, and the size of the opportunity, and why I was the one to do it. And he seemed impressed. He then told me they were looking to launch in South Africa. My stomach sank. This was my worst nightmare, like the one competitor I feared most. And then he actually asked me if I wanted to be part of the team launching this country in South Africa. I got off the call and I literally screamed and jumped around in the co-working offices I was at in Colombia. This was literally the best startup failure I could have ever hoped for. I was going to be doing everything I planned on doing without the headaches of building the tech and fundraising. However, this is where my startup story comes to a grinding halt. Next most crucial piece of advice I'd have is don't stop hunting for opportunities, investors, co-founders until a contract has been signed and countersigned. Once this co-founding offer was in the pipeline for South Africa, I felt like I'd made it. They offered me a lucrative job in LATAM in the interim, something I was so shocked about that I tiptoed around instead of jumping on it and accepting. So I sat there complacent for 1 month, 2 months, any moment now. I canned my startup. I was about to be playing with the big dogs, almost there. And this was definitely my biggest mistake. I had absolutely nothing in writing. I counted my chickens way before they'd been hatched. And after the embarrassingly public failure of the company's latest investor, they decided they had no appetite to expand beyond the region. It was just too risky. My tiptoeing around the interim job offer also made me look proud and naive. It disappeared. Just as I was putting defibrillators on my startup dream, a scary and unknown virus started to spread around the world. Countries got locked down, investors got spooked, and I missed my opportunity. The whole thing was dead in the water. So, rounding up, I look back, analyzing this post-mortem, and acknowledge the things that killed it more than others, so I don't make the same mistakes again. Would I change things? Absolutely. I did many things horrifically. Would I not do it and take that graduate offer? Absolutely not. I think I've learned more in the past year than I could have done in 2 years of a grad scheme. I've learned exactly what I'm good at, what I'm terrible at, how to fail slightly less next time, and maybe even succeed one day. There is such a wholesome feeling you get from working on something much bigger than you can ever understand. And that's what makes the chaoticness and ever-changing journey so enjoyable. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you have this itch to start a startup, do it, or at least join one. Thank you.